Good morning. Okay, my name is Dominic Statham. This is me aged 19 as a student at Loughborough University. As you can see, I haven't changed in the slightest. Now, I was sponsored through my university course by Rolls-Royce, and I went to work for them for a number of years after graduating. I worked on this engine here, the RB199, which powers the Panavia Tornado. Also this one, the Pegasus engine, which powers the Harrier jump jet. I then moved to the automotive industry, and in my last job, I helped design Jaguar and Land Rover vehicles. I worked on the part of the vehicle known as the driveline. That's how you get the power from the engine to the wheels. And in my very last assignment, I had to solve a particularly difficult vibration problem, which required me to do quite a lot of hairy mathematics, and I'm still getting over it. I now work for the Christian organisation Creation Ministries International. And as a Bible-believing Christian, I take the Bible to be the Word of God and true in everything it teaches. So, for example, I believe the Bible when it teaches that God created everything in 6 days. I also believe what the Bible teaches about God creating people, specially and supernaturally, rather than this idea that we evolved from ape-like creatures. And at Creation Ministries International, we seek to uphold the Bible from the very first verse. We are primarily an information ministry, providing people in the church with tools and information with which they can defend the Christian faith. We want to encourage Christians to hold fast to the Bible as the Word of God. And also we want to help equip the church to reach out to a fallen and lost world. And we're here today to make it clear that when it comes to science, Bible-believing Christians are not in difficulties, and that the Bible is a book that can be trusted. Now, if you'd like to know more about our ministry and would like to receive our free InfoBites email, then in just a moment, Ben's going to pass around some clipboards so that you can sign up for this if you'd like to. InfoBites will enable you to read our responses to the latest media stories about science and the Bible and creation and evolution. This is an example of one news item we had quite recently, answering the question, is teaching creation child abuse? As some has suggested. Here's another about how embracing evolutionary beliefs sometimes even turns pastors into atheists. And I can assure you it does happen. This one responds to a claim by National Geographic magazine that creationists are at war with science. Well, we're not. InfoBites will also keep you in touch with our latest news, bookstore offers, and so on. If you do sign up, so if you'd like to receive our free InfoBites email, please do pop your details down on the form. If you do that, we'd like to give you an assurance that we will not pass those details on to anybody else. We also have a website, and the web address is very easy to remember, creation.com. There's a search engine there in the top right-hand corner, and this enables people to enter keywords representing any question that they might have about the Bible and science and creation and evolution. There are around 10,000 articles now on the website dealing with all sorts of questions relating to these subjects. On creation.com, you'll also find Parents' Corner, which supports those involved in homeschooling and also other parents keen to help their children learn about creation. We're a small organisation, but we do have offices in various countries around the world. In the UK, we have a few staff manning the office, taking telephone orders for books and so on. Worldwide, we have 12 PhD scientists, all of whom could be earning far more money in secular employment. Some have given up their retirement years to serving God in this work. But why? Why do it? Why do people regard this ministry as that important? Well, some time ago, we received some feedback from a church youth worker in Australia. And she told us this. I used to beat my head against a wall, wondering why we lost all our young people at about age 16. I've realised that age 16 is when they teach evolution in depth in science. Some of the teachers actually identify the Christian students and make a special point of explaining the differences and difficulties in reconciling Genesis with the so-called facts of evolution. It's no wonder we lost them. I come near to tears just thinking about it. I was speaking not long ago to a British religious education teacher, and she told me that at age 11 or 12, when she teaches the youngsters about God and creation, they accept it. But by the time they've had a few years of so-called science teaching, they no longer believe. And you know, this can be a real issue for the youngsters coming from Christian families too. Unless they're equipped to answer what their school teachers are telling them about science having disproved the Bible, some of them are really going to struggle. And you know, it's not hard to imagine this scenario. Jamie goes along to his church youth group, and the youth leader is encouraging them to share their faith and invite their friends along. So Jamie plucks up courage and he invites his friend Sam. "Hey Sam, would you like to come along to my youth club?" And Sam replies, "Not really. I believe in science. Charles Darwin proved that we weren't created and that we evolved from apes. And what about dinosaurs? How did they fit into the Bible? They died out millions of years ago, and they could never have fitted into Noah's Ark anyway." Well, Jamie goes home and he asks his dad, and Dad doesn't know the answers, so he says, "Well, just have faith, son." But like many teens, Jamie wants answers, and he starts looking elsewhere. But you know he needn't, because by far, most of the so-called scientific reasons that people give for rejecting the Bible, we have the answers for. Sam asked, how did dinosaurs fit into the Bible? Well, this is one of the questions we answer in the Creation Answers book. You know, the media give people the impression that when it comes to science, Bible-believing Christians are in great difficulties, that we're well and truly on the back foot. But you know, this is simply not the case. Creation scientists have now found answers to many of the supposedly scientific objections to the Bible, and we've put together responses to the most commonly raised objections in this book. Well, the answer to Sam's question about the dinosaurs is that they could have easily fitted into Noah's Ark. The eggs of the great sauropods have now been found as fossils, and they're not much bigger than footballs, which means even the very largest dinosaurs could have fitted on the Ark as juveniles. And the dinosaur fossils that we find all over the earth are the remains of creatures that died in the great flood that we read about in the book of Genesis. Now, evolutionists, of course, say that all this is nonsense. They say that science has shown that the rocks are millions of years old. And science, they say, has shown that the dinosaurs died out millions of years ago. But has it? Has science really shown these things to be true? Well, not long ago, a particularly well-preserved Tyrannosaurus rex was discovered in Montana in the United States. And when they cut the thigh bone, this is what they found, this remarkably fresh-looking appearance. Some of the tissues, like this one here, were still soft and stretchy. They found these branching structures that looked just like blood vessels. And when they squeezed them, out came this stuff on the right that looked just like blood cells. And when they tested them, they found traces of the blood protein hemoglobin. Some of the bone proteins in this T-Rex were so well preserved, they could be compared with the proteins of living animals. You know, organic material like this just doesn't last millions of years. Dr. Mary Schweitzer was the lead scientist supervising this work. And speaking of these well-preserved dinosaur remains, Dr. Schweitzer, who's no young Earth creationist, said this: "When you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone. It should be degraded completely." And this is true. Everything we know from science tells us that bone tissues, blood cells and proteins simply would not last millions of years. And this is strong evidence from science that the Bible is true and that the rocks and fossils are not millions of years old. You know, from the New Testament, it's clear that Jesus accepted the Old Testament on face value. For example, he believed in a recent creation, a literal Adam, a literal Eve, and a literal global flood. But you know, if the evolutionary account of Earth history is the correct one, then the biblical account is not. In which case, Christ was wrong. Well, may I ask you some questions? If Jesus was wrong in what he had to say about our history, why should anyone believe what he had to say about the future? If he was wrong in what he taught about the judgment that came through the great flood, why should anyone listen to what he had to say about the judgment to come? If he was wrong in what he taught about Adam, why should anyone think that he's right in what he taught about himself? And if he was wrong about all these things, why should anybody take any notice of what he had to say about God and about morality and about sin and salvation? So you see, the creation-evolution debate is no side issue. It really matters what we believe about these things. I'm sure many here will be already familiar with Darwin's theory of evolution, the idea that people evolved from primitive life forms over millions of years. An idea, of course, that could not be more different to what the Bible teaches. According to the Bible, God made people specially and supernaturally, and he made the first man, Adam, from the dust of the earth. And according to the Bible, God made him fully formed and physically and morally perfect. But according to Charles Darwin, this isn't true at all. According to Darwin, people evolved from apes or ape-like creatures, and by a process of natural selection and survival of the fittest. It's a story of suffering and death from the beginning, where the weaker die off to make way for the stronger. Human life, as we see it today, Darwin taught, came into being through the death of the less fit. And again, all this couldn't be more different to the biblical view. Because according to the Bible, the world that God originally created was perfect. A place of beauty, peace, and harmony. A world that reflected the perfectly good nature of its creator. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 31, we read that God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. You see, according to the Bible, things like disease and violence and suffering and death came into the world only after people started to sin. According to the Bible, suffering and death were not part of God's original creation. But if evolution is true, then the Bible's not true, because the truth is really like this. You see, if evolution is true, and the fossil record tells the story of millions of years of evolution by natural selection, then suffering and death were in the world long before people existed, and therefore long before anybody was around to sin. According to the theory of evolution, death is not the result of sin, as the Bible teaches, but the means by which human life came into being, through natural selection and the death of the less fit. So you see, the two views, biblical creation and Darwin's theory, could not be more different. And again, this is no side issue. Have you ever been told that God cannot be a good God because of all the suffering in the world? Anyone ever told you that? This is the view firmly held by Stephen Fry. And when asked recently what he would say to God, if indeed there is a God and he were to meet him, this is how he responded. Bone cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? Why should I respect a God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain? Atheism is not just about not believing there's a God, but on the assumption there is one, what kind of God is he? It's perfectly apparent that he's monstrous and deserves no respect whatsoever. And you know, when professing Christians teach that God created through evolution, as some do, it seems to me that they leave their followers with no way of responding to this kind of argument. And I would suggest that for many non-Christians, the idea that a good and loving God perfected life on earth through a process of survival of the fittest simply doesn't wash. Nobel Prize-winning biologist and atheist Jacques Monod would agree. In a TV interview towards the end of his life, he said this: "The struggle for life and the elimination of the weakest is a horrible process. I am surprised that a Christian would defend the idea that this is the process which God more or less set up in order to have evolution." Well, of course, the answer to this is that God didn't use evolution to create. The Bible makes it absolutely clear that God created the first man specially and supernaturally. The Bible also gives us a very straightforward answer to Stephen Fry. According to the book of Genesis, the world that God originally created didn't have any of these bad things. Things like disease and violence and suffering and death came into the world only after people started to sin. So they're not God's fault. They're actually our fault. And that is the hard reality. But of course the Bible also gives us the good news, doesn't it? That God didn't want us to remain in this state. He sent his Son, Jesus Christ, into the world to die on the cross so that our sins could be forgiven. And after Jesus had died to pay the penalty for sin, God raised him from the dead, so that all who would follow him might be empowered to live a new life, and one that's pleasing to God. And Jesus said that one day he would return, and that he would restore the world to its original perfect form. And he's promised for all who will receive his salvation that then there would be no more suffering and no more death, which is why it's the good news. How many people here have been told that radiocarbon dating has proven the Earth to be millions or billions of years old? How many people have been told that? Yeah? Number? Yeah? Okay. This is actually very bad science. When informed scientists who know what they're talking about, seek to make the case that the rocks are millions of years old, they don't do it on the basis of radiocarbon dating, but that they would present the case based on other radioactive or radiometric dating methods. Okay, let me say that again, because it's a there's so much confusion about this, and it's actually really quite important. If we had a geologist here from Cambridge University, a professor, and he was seeking to make the case that the rocks are millions of years old, he would not do so on the basis of radiocarbon dating. Okay? Carbon dating is used to try and date artifacts that are thought to be just thousands of years old, for example, at an archaeological site. There's a very good reason for this, and that is that radiocarbon doesn't last very long, and it wouldn't last anywhere near millions of years. If you had a piece of radiocarbon, this radioactive carbon that they use to do this carbon dating, if you had a piece of radioactive carbon the same size as the Earth, it's a pretty big piece of radioactive carbon, the same size as the Earth, it would have all decayed away in less than 1 million years. There'd be nothing left of it. So it's clearly impossible to use radiocarbon to try and argue that something's millions of years old, which is why when informed scientists seek to make the case that the rocks are millions of years old, they do it on the basis of other different radiometric or radioactive dating methods, not radiocarbon. Okay, now, this is an article from Our Creation magazine, and it explains why radiocarbon actually provides evidence that the Earth is young, as the Bible teaches. You see, it's been discovered that diamonds, taken from rocks supposedly hundreds of millions of years old, contain significant amounts of radiocarbon. If they were really all these millions of years old, they wouldn't have all this radiocarbon in them because it would have decayed away. So next time somebody mentions carbon dating, just remember, it's the true friend of young Earth creationists. Now, many people have been told that the numerous thin layers from which rocks are composed show that they were formed gradually, that they were built up very slowly, one fine layer on top of another, over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. But when some sand was pumped in a water slurry onto a beach in Australia, it was seen to settle in fine layers. This happened in just a matter of hours. So you don't need long periods of time to build up many thin layers at all. This photograph shows some fossilized trees. You can see them there in the upright condition. How could these possibly have remained in place over thousands of years, as sand and mud and other sediments slowly built up around them? It seems far more likely that they were buried in a great flood, such as the one we read about in the book of Genesis. It's often claimed that some of the things that we find in rocks require very long periods of time to form. It's said, for example, of opal, that this is produced very slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, and hence the Earth must be much older than the Bible teaches. But recently, the Geological Survey of New South Wales made this rather telling confession. They wrote, "The time taken for the formation of opal is probably of the order of weeks to months, and not hundreds of thousands of years required by the conventional weathering model." I wonder how many people accepted that the Bible is wrong in what it teaches about the age of the Earth, because science had supposedly proven that opal takes hundreds of thousands of years to form. Did you know that there are many fossils found in rocks which evolutionists say are millions of years old that look just the same as creatures we know today? One example is the ginkgo plant. The fossil on the left is supposedly 170 million years old, but it looks just the same as the living plant. There's not much sign of evolution here. Another example is the coelacanth. Now, coelacanths, we were told, died out along with the dinosaurs around 65 million years ago. Subsequently, it was discovered that they're still swimming happily in our oceans. Now, according to evolutionary theory, these fish haven't changed significantly in over 360 million years. Now, according to evolutionists, the evolutionary process is so powerful it can turn ape-like creatures into humans in just 5 or 6 million years. But it didn't seem to change these coelacanths very much in over 360 million years. That's about the same time it supposedly took for fish to evolve into people. They've even found fossilized jellyfish in rocks supposedly over 500 million years old that look just like jellyfish we know today. Did you know that the cells of our bodies are full of complex machines? This is another article from our Creation magazine, and it describes one of these machines. This one's called ATP synthase, and I've got an animation of it here, if I can make it work. This machine, we've got trillions of these little machines in the cells of our bodies making these ATP units. You can see them coming out here. These ATP units provide the fuel for our bodies to work. So, for example, when we use our muscles to lift things, it's these ATP molecules that are providing the energy to do so. As I said, we have trillions of these machines in the cells of our bodies whirring around at about 6,000 revolutions per minute. No evolutionist has ever shown how a machine like this could evolve. Because this Darwinian process supposedly occurs through a series of tiny steps, small steps. But a machine like this would have no useful function unless it was more or less complete. So it's very difficult to try and argue that that could have evolved. This is another of the machines that we find in the cells of our bodies. It's a transport machine called kinesin. Now, the cells in our bodies are like factories, just like human factories. And they've got machines and processes going on and so on. And just as in man-made factories, we need machines to move materials from one process to another or one machine to another, so also in the human cell, animal cells. This is one of the transport machines in our cells. Again, we've got trillions of these in our bodies. The blue bag contains the materials that need to be transported from one part of the cell to another. And the kinesin is this stepping machine, and it acts a little bit like a tug. And I've got an animation of kinesin, which was produced by Harvard University. Here he is. Isn't he beautiful? Now, for the technically minded, each step that kinesin takes utilizes one of those ATP units that we saw being manufactured on the previous machine. Kinesin is 70 billionths of a meter long, and it walks along the track at 100 steps per second. And that's equivalent to a man running at over 2,000 kilometers per hour. Now again, no evolutionist has ever shown how a machine like this could evolve. Because then again, it would have no useful function unless it was more or less complete. You know, it really matters what we believe about evolution and creation and where we came from. I'm sure some here will remember the Columbine High School massacre, which occurred in 1999. 2 teenage boys Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold shot dead 12 of their colleagues and one of their teachers. One of them had a T-shirt, was wearing a T-shirt with "natural selection" written on it. And Eric said on a video they taped beforehand, "Sometime in April, me and Dylan will get revenge and we'll kick natural selection up a few notches." The creation-evolution debate, is no side issue. It matters what we believe about where we came from. In his book, Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler argued that Darwinism was the only basis for a successful Germany. And speaking of pre-war Germany, the surgeon and anthropologist, Professor Arthur Keith, wrote this: "The German Führer, as I have consistently maintained, is an evolutionist. He has consciously sought to make the practice of Germany conform to the theory of evolution." Hitler himself declared at a Nazi party rally in 1933, "Higher race subjects to itself a lower race, a right which we see in nature." Now, Charles Darwin was in many ways a Victorian gentleman. He abhorred slavery and actually gave regularly to missionary causes. But his evolutionary beliefs led to him having a dark side, and he was explicitly racist. Darwin believed that the different human races, as he saw them, had evolved separately, and that some had evolved more than others. And although he didn't advocate the extermination of dark-skinned people, he did predict, based on his theory, that the superior, more evolved white races, as he saw them, would replace the inferior, less evolved black races, as he saw them. Now, I dare say it grieves you that anybody could have said such things, but he did say them, and many people accepted his argument. The Harvard University historian of science, Professor Stephen Jay Gould, wrote this: "Biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, but they increased by orders of magnitude following acceptance of evolutionary theory." Well, of course, all this is very politically incorrect, isn't it? But what is politically incorrect one day may not be so politically incorrect another. The answer to the problem of racism is the biblical doctrine of creation. Because according to this, there aren't more and less evolved human races. There's just one human race, the people descended from Adam. And if you believe that, you can't be racist. The Apostle Paul confirmed this in his address to the Athenians. He said, "From one man God made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth." Have you ever wondered how this could be? How could dark-skinned people and light-skinned people come from the same man? Well, this is another article from our Creation magazine, and it features these two lovely twin girls, one with blue eyes and light skin, and the other with brown eyes and brown skin. And here are mum and dad, and here they are as a family. Mum and dad, two medium brown-skinned people. Personally, I have little doubt that Adam and Eve had their skin colour. Now, the part of our DNA, which is known as the Y chromosome, is passed from father to son. Okay, women don't have a Y chromosome. And secular geneticists, that's geneticists who would make no profession of Christian faith, secular geneticists have been all around the world sampling people's Y chromosomes, men's Y chromosomes. And they've come to the conclusion that the whole of humanity is descended from one man. I kid you not. They've given him the name Y-chromosomal Adam. Not because they believe in Adam and Eve, of course, but it does seem a rather good name, doesn't it, if you're a biblical creationist? Now, the Bible also tells us that we're also all descended from one woman. We read in Genesis chapter 3 that Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. Now, the part of our DNA known as mitochondrial DNA is inherited just from the mother. Both men and women have mitochondrial DNA, but you just get it from your mum. And secular geneticists, that's geneticists who would make no profession of Christian faith, secular geneticists have gone all around the world sampling people's mitochondrial DNA. And they've come to the conclusion that the whole of humanity is descended from one woman. I kid you not. They've given her the name mitochondrial Eve. Not because they believe in Adam and Eve, of course, but it does seem a rather good name, doesn't it, if you're a biblical creationist. Now, the Bible also tells us that God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. According to the Bible, we were made in the image, that is, in the likeness of God. God is loving, righteous, and holy, and he made us to be the same. We were made to be like God in other ways too. For example, God is creative, which is why we are creative. And you know, Darwin's theory of evolution has great difficulties explaining the nature of man. For example, humans have some very remarkable abilities. We can do very complex abstract mathematics, produce beautiful artwork, and play musical instruments brilliantly. How could an evolutionary process of survival of the fittest have produced abilities like these? I mean, the ability to play the piano offers no survival advantage in the jungle. So why should it evolve? What we observe of humanity fits the biblical account of creation far better than it fits the evolution story. But what about evolution and morality? Well, in the February 2010 edition of the BBC's Focus magazine, we were told that the tendency to sin was hardwired into our brains through the evolutionary process. Lust, they said, arose from the need to pass on our genes to future generations. Gluttony, they said, was an evolutionary response to scarcity of food. Sloth arose due to the need to conserve calories, and envy, they said, arose to help us improve our performance. Now, according to the theory of evolution, the most natural thing in the world is for a man to desire his next-door neighbour's wife. That's how we evolved, we're told. And you know, more and more I hear from psychologists that if we don't do that which is natural, it will be psychologically damaging. So there you have it. If you don't sin, it will be bad for you. That's the message. How different from the teaching of Jesus. Jesus said, "From within, out of men's hearts come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly." The desire to do that which is evil is not natural in the sense that it did not arise from an evolutionary process. According to Jesus, evil comes from sin in the heart. It is unnatural in the sense that it was never the way we were created to be. You know, if there's nothing more than matter and energy, as atheists tell us, and people are nothing more than bags of chemicals and evolved microbes, then let's face it, ideas like morality and love and right and wrong and so on are meaningless. And you'd have to conclude too that life has no meaning itself. According to Professor Richard Dawkins, the universe we observe has no design, no purpose, no evil and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA, he says, neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Similarly, Professor Susan Blackmore tells us, in the end, nothing matters. If you really think about evolution and why we human beings are here, you have to come to the conclusion that we are here for absolutely no reason at all. Professor William Provine, who was an evolutionary biologist at Cornell University in the United States, went further, arguing that so-called evolutionary science makes clear that there is in fact no basis for morality. He said, "Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear. And these are basically Darwin's views. There are no gods, no purposes, and no goal-directed forces of any kind. There's no life after death. When I die, I am absolutely certain that I'm going to be dead. That's the end of me. There is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no free will for humans either." And this, is being taught to our youngsters in the universities as science. Frankly, I think I'd struggle to think of a more damaging doctrine with which to raise the up-and-coming generation. You see, the creation-evolution debate is no side issue. It matters what we believe and teach about these things. And this kind of secular onslaught, it's not confined to the universities. It's going on in the schools too. And our youngsters need to hear a well-argued alternative view. And they need to be helped to see that the Bible isn't just defensible. Biblical creation is not just defensible, but it's actually far more rational than what the atheists believe. And atheism, incidentally, is a faith, every bit as much as Christianity is a faith. A couple of years ago, I met a Christian head teacher of a state school, a secular school in Spain. And he told me why he became involved in the creation ministry. And it was this. He said he started to realize how hard it could be for the youngsters coming from Christian families when their school teachers argued so strongly that science had disproved the Bible. He told me how he came to see the inner turmoil of some of these kids as they really struggled because they didn't have any answers. And this is one of the reasons we produce Creation Magazine. It's to give people the answers. There's no need for Christians to struggle in this area. Science has not disproved the Bible, and it is not difficult to demonstrate this, and that's what we do in article after article in this magazine. Creation Magazine's been around for about 40 years. It's distributed now in over 100 countries. It comes out quarterly, 4 issues per year, and it's in full colour. There are often articles responding to the latest pronouncements by people like Richard Dawkins. I can assure you that at Creation Ministries International, we are not the slightest bit intimidated by this man. We just wait for him to make his latest gaffe, and then we write about it. And he makes plenty of them. This is an article I wrote showing how the Bible explains the diversity of life far better than Darwin's theory. There are often articles about astronomy and how the evidence from astronomy supports what the Bible teaches about a recent creation. Anyone ever told you that before? There's plenty of evidence from astronomy supporting what the Bible teaches about a recent creation. Let me give you an example. Did you know that the moon is constantly moving away from the Earth? This time next year, the moon will be around 4 centimeters further away from the Earth than it is today. If the moon had really been orbiting the Earth for all the billions of years they say, it would now be far further away from the Earth than it is. And there are many other facts from astronomy like that supporting what the Bible teaches about a recent creation. This is an article which explains how Christian beliefs laid the foundations for modern science in the 16th and 17th centuries. Did you know that there are leading secular historians of science who would agree that the modern scientific revolution arose out of Christian beliefs and a Christian worldview? We could spend a whole evening on it. Almost all the founders of modern science were Bible-believing creationists, and they would write about how their belief in creation and their belief in the creator God of the Bible inspired them to do their scientific work. Creation magazine is a family magazine. There's always a central section for the youngsters. I believe it's true to say that we've had more life-changing testimonies from this magazine than from any of our other materials. I've got a couple of testimonies here. Rod Walsh is one of our speakers in Australia. He told us this after one of his meetings. He said, 3 people came up to me after the message and told me that Creation magazine was responsible for their conversion to Christ. Well, another testimony here from Peter L., aged 12. He wrote in, "Your magazine is great. As soon as it comes through the door, the wrapper comes off and I'm reading it. I wish it came out more often." It's a wonderful testimony from a young lad of 12. If you're thinking you might like to subscribe, we've got a special offer on. If you subscribe today for 1 year, you can take away a free back issue. If you subscribe today for 3 years, you can take away a free back issue and also a free DVD. This, I think, is a particularly good offer. You can now read Creation magazine digitally, say on a smartphone, an iPad, a laptop, that sort of thing. And for just an extra £3 a year, it can be accessed on up to 5 different e-devices. So if you're a grandparent, for example, you've got 5 grandchildren, you'd like them all to read Creation magazine, that can be set up for just an extra £3 on top of your subscription. So then you'd get the print copy posted to your home address, and it could then be also the e-version could be accessed on up to 5 different devices. We're going to pass around some clipboards now for those who'd like to subscribe. If you do subscribe today, please do see Ben and pay, otherwise you don't get your freebies. You can think about it if you want to and then sign up later online, but if you do that, there are no freebies. I've already mentioned the Creation Answers book. If you're thinking of taking away just one resource from the book tables at the back, I would recommend this. You consider this one. It answers the most commonly asked questions about the Bible and science, and probably more than any other book, this one demonstrates that Bible-believing Christians really have nothing to be afraid of from science. We've actually run out of this one. It's been so popular. It's just recently been published, and it's for teens, for the 15 to 18 age group. It gets across the creation message in the context of a particularly gripping story. Now, it's set in a boys' boarding school, so it can be a bit rough in places, but we think most Christian parents would be comfortable with the content. there are very few resources for teenagers, and this is a particularly good one. So if you know a teenager who might be facing evolutionary indoctrination in schools, or you're worried about this constant indoctrination through the media, and you'd like to give them something to help them along their journey, this, I think, would be a particularly good gift. Now, if you do buy it, we would recommend that you get it from us. And the reason for that is that there's a previous version out that we wouldn't recommend. We should have brought more on the tour. Unfortunately, we've run out, but you could either phone the office and you could order it by phone, or you can get it from our website. Please do remember to visit the website, creation.com. Please do remember the search engine. If you're sharing Christ with somebody next week, maybe a member of your family, someone at work, the next door neighbour, and they raise a supposedly scientific objection to the Bible, and you don't know the answer, get onto creation.com, enter keywords representing that question into the search engine, and you're very likely to find an article which will give you the answer. You can then read the article and tell them the answer, or you could just email them the link. You can also download our app, creation.mobi. It's free. If you don't know how to do that, don't ask me, but just have a word with Ben or speak to someone over the age of about 6. Yeah, if you've got any questions, I'll be available during the coffee time. Just come up to me and I'll do my best to answer you. Don't know why this isn't working. I'm trying to blank it, but okay, thank you.